Thank you. All right. Morning, everyone. Let's open this Audit and Risk Committee meeting. Me, Tracy, would you like to leave the karakia, please? Oh, sorry, I should use my mic. My apologies.
Morena koutou. Ko ranganui ki ronga, ko papatua nuku ki raro. Ko tātou ta ira tangata, ki wānganui, ti hei Māori ora. Sky Father above, Mother Earth below, all of us in the middle, breath of life. Māori ora.
Thank you, Mayor Tracy. And do we have any apologies? We've got Councillor Sharon and Councillor Scott online. Welcome. Hope you're feeling okay. Sorry?
Dead.
They're dead?
No, we're not dead.
Totally fine. Thank you very much for checking.
Yeah, and I am too. I couldn't believe it when that line came up.
Right, but thank you for your proactiveness. Right. Do we need to formally approve the apologies if they're online? No, they're here. Public forum? No public forum. Mr. Chief Executive, nothing on the, no items that are not on the agenda. Thank you. Okay, item 5, declarations of conflict of interest. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest that need to be declared? Just none. Right, the first item, item 6, page 3, our confirmation of our minutes held. Oh, why isn't it working? So I've lost it. It was here. 23rd of July, taken as read. Any corrections, comments? All right, can I then have a mover that we confirming a true and accurate record? Got Councillor Peter next door. All those in no discussion, all in favour, please say aye. Carried. Reports 7.1, page 11, the Tararua Alliance report. Thanks, Dan. We'll take your report as read. Any further information or key highlights you want to bring to the committee's attention?
Through your chair. So no, just the key things that we've touched on the report is just around those zero harm statistics that we talked about adding to this report. You'll see that we've talked about just the near miss reporting that's coming through and the key trends that are coming out of that, out of those near miss reports, which is around traffic management and driving for us. So I did mention at the last meeting that as far as traffic management goes, there hasn't been much near misses happening. However, the reporting that we're getting through is more around incorrect setup of sites. It's just coming through as a near miss. So it's just the way that reporting is coming through. As far as driving goes, that is probably as far as zero harm is concerned, is probably the biggest risk for us. We have had quite a lot of driving incidents in the past. So there's a few initiatives that we've put in place to combat that. In regards to network risk, so this was brought up at the ICM meeting, but is a reduction in the footpath budget that's been indicated by NZTA. So you'll see in the report that essentially we put the request through for $4 million over the 24-27 NLTP period, and what's been indicated is from NZTA is the 648,000, which is essentially an 84% reduction. So we are currently reviewing what the level of service would look like with that funding that we would have, which will be reported through. And the other risk is around the emergency works funding criteria. So we've had $20 million approved for this financial year at the 93% FAR rate. It's what we're going to do with the remaining 20 million going into the following financial year if NZTA adjusts their investment policy with that reduced FAR rate of only a 10% increase to the standard FAR rate, and what that'll mean obviously to affordability. However, that $20 million there is a resilience that's been put into that $20 million. So it'll be a case of what we want to look at doing or what's going to be our level of service come into this financial year when we can review essentially where we're at as far as undertaking the Cyclone Gabrielle repairs.
Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. As far as resilience goes, I understand that 20 million, you're allowed to do resilience work with that money, not just, right, okay, thank you. Second question, if I may, has there been a review of traffic management with regard to necessity for cone use, for example? I know there's been a lot of talk nationally about the overkill and maybe there's someone making a lot of money out of it unnecessarily. But have you conducted a review yourselves in that regard?
Through you, Chair. So in regards to your first question around resilience, so yes, we are putting resilience into existing sites that we're building. The sites that we are, basically each site goes through NZTA for approval before we do that, because there has been, from what I understand, not in this district, but other areas where when they talk about resilience and the Build Back Better comments, is that they are going over and above the actual emergency works repairs themselves with the funding that they have. So we are making sure that we're getting their approval before we undertake that resilience work from NZTA. The second question around the traffic management. So we're currently undertaking that review. We are, through what's been requested by NZTA as well, as basically tracking our traffic management costs separately to the operational works that's happening, so we can get an understanding about how much of it is actually going into traffic management. But as far as reviewing it, we're constantly reviewing it when it comes to pricing each job in regards to how much traffic management has been input to it. And if it's more than what we would expect, then we would go back to whoever is pricing that job, or whether it's our internal crews, and just review basically how that pricing has been built up and where there's more cost efficient options that we can use. But it's always the challenge of the compliance versus the cost, and making sure that we are meeting essentially our minimum compliance and making sure that the team are safe, but at the same time being as cost efficient as we can.
Hello. I had the question asked of me, who sets the rules regarding traffic management?
So there's a basic NZTA guideline that's used called COPTIM, and that's the guideline that we need to follow. That guideline is essentially the only guideline at this point until NZGTM is fully implemented, which is the more risk-based approach that I believe has been spoken about in the past. We are currently looking at doing some trials with NZGTM to get an understanding about what it will mean versus using COPTIM. But yeah, those guidelines are set through NZTA.
Yeah, thank you. For you, Chair Philip. Yeah, it's much along the same lines, because, you know, we've heard it from the PM down and the Minister of Transport. So they're all talking about change, because on average, there's a figure banging around about 41% of capital works is done in road management, which is obviously what we're all thinking about, is this cost. And when we've got reduced funds going forward, and then we've still got a mountain of cones, it's illogical. So what I would like to ask, when is the change? And you must have some information that after a certain date, we're only going to go down to 2 cones, or this COP thing, whatever, you know what I mean? Because no, we are so apathetic. The whole time we sit in this room, they're all talking about change. We just come back from this conference and what they were going to do and what they weren't going to do. And then as soon as somebody says they're going to do something, they get told off, but they are the acting government, and that's why they're in power. Because we don't, if you do the same thing on the same day and expect change, well, that's the definition of stupidity. So I know it's not you guys, but surely our CE or Hamish, somebody must, let's drive it from Taurua and say, oi, let's stop it. Or am I, I don't think I'm out of order.
Through the chair, I do. Councillor Steve, when you say we're apathetic in this room,
I didn't say that. I said the government is. The whole system is. The whole system is.
thank you
Not
for
this
that
one.
clarification.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. Just, my understanding from the grapevine, because that's all it is at the moment, right? That Copthorne was up for consideration. A local authority can actually develop their own. Sorry, Hamish, do you want to comment?
Chair Philip. So just a bit of, I guess, broad context. So NZTTM, so the current setup that there is administered by NZTA. This new version, it's up to councils to decide when they move to it. But they have NZTA have only just started testing it, so it's very much in its infancy. But we were working towards the ability to be able to do things differently, and it is a focus more on closing sections of road rather than leaving them open. So getting in there, doing a whole lot of work all at once, closing the roads. And the number of cones, just for your information, is very, very specific. There's a distance between each cone that has to be met. So yes, it may look like there's 1,000 cones on the road, but it's because there's 1,000 meters. So that's the way it's been working.
I just stay there, Hamish, because what I heard was actually too, the new approach is actually more of a risk-based approach. So the council, when they do it, they actually have to understand the risk level and accept that risk level. So while it's great that we might be moving to a more flexible approach, my understanding is that we actually need to do a lot more work to be assured that we've actually got a process to identify the appropriate level of risk for our roads rather than just this blanket risk approach. Am I right on that one?
Yes, yeah, completely. And I think that's the risk, the issue that contractors are dealing with at the moment as well, is how do they absolve themselves of the risk of looking after their staff?
To me, it's just to conclude, right? I think, yes, it's all very well, but I think there's a lot of work that needs to go on before we actually see a more flexible approach, if that's the right way to deal with it, right? And it would be useful, because there's a lot of chatter about it, right? It would be nice to sort of say is, look, we're expecting to be able to start working on this in X, right? And we expect to have it maybe in place by Y, right? I'm not putting any pressure on you, right? But then therefore we can actually give our community some assurance, yes, we've taken on board, we're working through it, rather than just continue to talk about it. Sorry, Dan, just to give you a bit more work, but I think that's, right, would be useful because of the chatter. Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Carey.
Thanks, Chair Philip. Just a comment, really, looking at the reduced footpath funding and then later on the roads funding. It was more, obviously it's significant, and it's an area that the footpath area is an area that has quite a lot of noise in the community. But I think we need to really make sure we develop a public comms about this. Going forward, I think we really need a bit of a plan, and we really need a proactive comms plan. So the community, we will need to take the community on board with this really significantly. And if it happens with the rural roads, and it could well, I don't see any good news in the stuff coming out of NZTA. I don't think to expect any bonuses out of this. So that it'll probably need to flow onto that too, but just thanks.
I can concur with that, and what I would be, so put more pressure on you, Dan, right? But to me, this is about, also part of this committee is about risk. So you talked about the reduced potential funding from the recovery from Cyclone Gabrielle, right? And also the reduced funding from footpaths. What I would be really keen to see, in addition to what Councillor Carey has suggested, would be a bit of an assessment as to what are the risks for council in terms of its asset maintenance, and level of service going forward because of that reduced funding and potential options for council to reduce that risk. Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Chair Philip. Just a question. The original 4 million, that did include us doing our driveway crossings though, didn't it? Footpath driveway crossings? It didn't?
So through the footpath, yeah, so through the sections of the footpath sections of the crossings.
So that now that won't happen, is that right? Well, up until now, I understand we've always had the approach where the property owner is responsible for maintaining that. I'm a bit lost on whether we were going to do that or we're not going to do it now, or what the story is.
Yeah. I just remember to stay here.
Thank you, Chief Philip. So I think the plan was that with that $4 million, we'd start addressing the issues of what we would consider the footpath through a crossing. So not the whole crossing, but the piece that people would be walking on. So with the drop in funding to a tiny fraction of what it was, there's no way we can afford to do that unless we look to fund it completely out of rates, which would have to be an annual plan or LTP discussion.
That's what I thought it was. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Councillor Scott, I see your hand up.
Thanks very much, Chair Philip. Along the lines of the vehicle crossings as well, and with footpaths, I share, and I think I raised it in our last council meeting when it came up, share the concerns about the, I guess, the communications plan and bringing the community along with us with the footpath reduction. But we also do have one of our biggest challenges with it, as Councillor Allison brought up, was the vehicle crossings part of it. And I wonder if it is worth us also adding to any plan that we do a more coordinated effort to enforce people who have very, very damaged vehicle entranceways that are their responsibility, and make sure that they bring them up to standard as part of that. That is probably the genesis of a huge amount of concerns when it comes to footpaths, are things that actually we don't have responsibility for. And I wonder if part of this journey is we make sure that people are meeting all of their obligations. So I just thought I'd put that out there if there's going to be work done on any strategies around this.
Thanks for that. Any other questions, comments? We brought you up to the table. I wouldn't quite say go now, right? If no more further questions or comments, can I have a mover for the recommendation? I think that was Councillor Peter, Councillor Steve. Right, or no further discussion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Next item, 7.2, on draft audit management reports. Oh, thank you. Thank you, team. We'll take, I think you might want to introduce a bit of background to this would be appreciated. Thanks, team.
Thank you, Chair Philip. Morning, everyone. As Philip alluded to, I'll give you a little bit of a background to this report. The draft 2022 audit management report is in its final stages, so we don't expect any changes from this report, just waiting audit approval. However, the 2023 management report is in its very first draft. So the process that we go through with these reports is the auditors provide us with a draft report. We provide our draft comments back to the report, and there's usually a conversation or a bit of toing and froing. Some constructive conversations occur, and you end up with a final report, which is what we would usually be tabling here. However, with the time lag that we've had with this, getting these reports to you, we've opted to provide you the raw draft of the 2023, which was provided back to audit last week. So just in case you're wondering why there's quite a difference within the two reports, that is the little bit of background within it. There, I have given in detail the dates in which the reports were received to give a bit of context, but what I didn't include was the date in which our annual reports were adopted for each of those years. So you recall the 2022 year was the gift that kept giving, and I think we adopted that annual report on the 28th of June 2023. And then the June 2023 annual report was a gift that kept giving, just not as much as the 22, and that was adopted on the 28th of February 2024. There's some really good feedback received within these reports. Please, we do appreciate what the auditors do for us, and we welcome the feedback. From these two reports, the key piece of work that we have taken away and we're working on to try and get closed off within this 24 annual report would be the piece around our revaluations. That seems to always be the gift that keeps giving and gives us issues year on year on year. So we have been very proactive this year. It's been quite a staged approach, I guess. So I think you'll recall we went from a 1 July revaluation date, and then in the 2022 year, we ended up changing to a 30 June valuation date. We've stuck with that 30 June valuation date. It just allowed us to get things over the line a little bit easy, not easier, but clearer with the auditors, because a fair value adjustment or a fair value assessment would be required. So we've moved our valuation date. As part of that process as well, we've engaged the auditors early. We've signalled to them what our process is going to be for this 2024. We've sought their feedback. We've involved our infrastructure team, our GMs, and our external valuer within this process. We are pretty confident, I'm confident that we've taken the right steps to ensure that the 2024 valuation should be a lot smoother than what we've experienced in the past. If there aren't any questions, actually, I'll pause, and if you don't mind, Chair Philip, and ask for any questions around the two reports before I delve into the 24 annual report letter memo.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the draft and the final management reports? All right. Oh, Mayor Tracy.
Thanks, through you, Chair. I just wanted to talk a little bit around some of the comments made by audit around the risk of management override and the approval of sensitive expenditure. Where did they see that wasn't happening within the system?
Thank you, Mayor Tracy, through you, Chair Philip. That item became an item within the 2022 annual report. We changed our processes in the 2023 report, but with the time lag between reports, we weren't able to get it closed off. So we're hoping to see that closed off within the 24 annual report process. It came down to just the process for our credit cards and the way in which we were getting them authorised. We've changed that as part of this whole process. We've also changed the staff reimbursement forms to ensure we're capturing the one-up approval and just a lot of extra training. I think financial delegations and approval of things is going to be something that we are going to have to forever ensure we're educating and taking our managers and our staff on the journey with us.
Any other questions? Oh, thank you. So thank you, Scott. I missed that. I forgot you down there. Sorry. I was looking over the top of you.
That's okay. You were probably looking at my direction of where I usually sit. Thanks, Chair Philip. Thank you very much, Sarah, for that. And I think you've partially answered the question that I had. I was looking at 4.3, which is on page 41 of our papers, and it was looking at approval in line with delegated financial authority. So totally accept what the auditors have said there and accept the management comment. However, what I was curious to know, I mean, financial delegations are really crucial that they're followed, and we have trust that they are followed. Have there been any additional controls that have been put in place, noting that, within their sample, they've found examples of where things have perhaps been purchased that have exceeded the financial delegation? Appreciate that staff training will be provided, but are there any other controls and system controls to ensure that this couldn't happen?
Thank you for that very great question through you, Chair Philip. Yes, so within our accounts payable system, it's called ESCA, and it automatically knows staff's financial delegations and allows them to put in a purchase order. It will then automatically generate to their one-up should it be outside of their control. In this instance, that was discovered, it was a contract that had been signed as opposed to the individual purchase. So the way the financial delegations work is that the value of the item, goods, contract in its entirety needs to be within the financial delegation of the person approving it. The individual invoices come as a separate instance. So in this one instance, the person has approved it because they've had the appropriate delegation to approve the invoice. However, they didn't have the appropriate delegation to sign the contract. So I think you would have seen Jess Smith, our procurement and legal manager, has been successful in recruiting within her team a contracts specialist. Sorry, question mark on that. And they're proactive and engaging and getting those contracts and ensuring we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's. We are also holding appropriate financial delegation training. I want to say, Stephen, is it quarterly? We're sort of running it, and it's kind of a mandatory thing that our managers are attending. So it's forever an educational piece, and we're taking steps that we can to try and mitigate. But is there a one-stop shop for it all? No, it's a team effort, I guess, is the best way to describe it.
Okay, thanks for that, Sarah. And with your permission, Chair Philip, can I just ask a final question on this?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. So quite a similar question through you to Sarah, 4.6, which is the reconciliation review. That's on page 42 of our papers. Just noting that, some reconciliations hadn't been reviewed. Have we added in further controls to ensure that they are reviewed in compliance with policy?
Thank you. Great question again. The reconciliation reviews, I'm going to be honest with you, when team constraints and time capacity becomes an issue, the reconciliations are the one thing that sort of falls off the wagon. However, we're quite conscious. We know what audit seek in this space, and so we put quite a bit of effort on this to make sure that we're within compliance for when we get to year end. The reconciliation, so within that, I don't know if it's in this one or if it's in the 2023, there is it's called a suspense account, but it's a holding account for where our payroll transactions go. So one of the key things that they've said is that we need to do a reconciliation on this, but the account zeroes out within the fortnight. So it's yes, great practice to make sure we're doing it, but is it necessary to be done each fortnight and each month? Probably not. It could just be a year-end reconciliation. So these are the conversations that we have with the auditors. The key accounts that they search for are around our cash, which rightfully so, that is one of our biggest fraudulent areas that can occur. And we do dot our I's and cross our T's in those ones specifically.
Very helpful. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks for that segue, Sarah, because that was going to be my issue over reconciliations, right? To me is what I want some assurance that the critical reconciliations are being done on a timely manner, right? And that, like you're saying, the example of that, what's this payroll suspense account, when the money goes in and the money goes out and it's zero every fortnight, right? That someone is just ticking that off. I wouldn't expect a reconciliation on that one, but I would expect that we get some assurance that that sort of check is actually being done on an appropriate basis. So I'm looking to the chief executive, maybe through Raj or someone, right? How can we actually get assurance, right? Because I think reconciliations are really important, that those critical ones are being done, because it looks like it looks like, right? But the question is, can you give us assurance, right? Audit have raised probably the wrong question, in my opinion, right? And I see a few other comments in here that I think audit have actually got the wrong end of the stick, right? And and I've had a discussion with staff and they agree with me, and I'll share it with everyone, right? That they said that, and Hamish is smiling because I know it's going to affect his area. They're saying that council should use the most recent contract rates, which is actually not technically correct for the revaluation. The revaluation, you should be using your contract rates at the date of the revaluation, because you're doing the revaluation as of a certain date. Therefore, that is the date that you actually do your replacement. The fact that they're saying is what is the current contract rates might be another 6 months later, which actually would inflate your revaluation. So, revaluations are technical, right? They require a really good understanding of not only the accounting standard, but also the valuation depreciation guidelines and the valuation standards. So it's not a straightforward auditing process from a financial perspective. I'll say no more on that one, but that's the world that we actually live in. And I think I'm going to make an anti-audit statement, and it's anti-audit against all auditors. Auditors don't necessarily understand the revaluation process. And I'm seeing this elsewhere with the amount of time and effort that's being wasted in some councils looking at the revaluation process. But I think what we need as a council, we need assurance that our revaluation processes comply with the valuation standards, the depreciation and valuation guidelines, and the accounting standards. So, Kerry, did you have a question or comment?
Oh, when you finish.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That was just an example. I mean, to me, there are, and it would be really good to actually, I'm disappointed in audit that it's taken, you adopted the annual report for 23 at the beginning of 24, and it's taken until August. I know everyone's been busy, but then it's not actually that helpful, because you get the comments now, but you can't clear them in time for this year, because they need to be cleared by 30th of June, which is well and truly gone. So we need to send a message that more timely management letters would be appreciated by the committee, and particularly the LTP, which I'll speak to the councillors after the meeting on. So I think we need to send a new audit director a message. Raj, do you want to make a comment on that? You just put your, and then Councillor Kerry.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I guess it's just to answer your questions regards to assurance, giving the committee assurance. When Sarah talked about, I think we're responding to Gilmore's question about the reconciliation and where they prioritize, and I think she followed through with where they understand the risk, the high priority reconciliations are. So even though the team is stretched, they do apply what we call a risk-based approach to it. But I think where I take your point is that we actually maybe have a discussion with the auditors where we list all the reconciliations we are doing and where it sits in terms of priorities and which we think are critical in terms of giving, I guess, a critical reconciliation that we have to do, like cash and elements, so that if so that we understand if we have to drop something, we don't drop that. And so that's critical. So that we understand. We also, I think, it's part of the process to make sure that if you're dropping it, we don't let it drop for far too long, because that's where the auditors would come and say, you know, if for example, for the past 6 months you haven't done the reconciliation. That's not the case, but I think it's just having a structured framework in place, and I think that gives the teams a guideline as to how they go about prioritizing work when they need to. And also at the same time, I guess it gives the auditors and I guess the committee here some assurance that we do know the reconciliation that we have to do. We understand the priorities, the risk in relations to the reconciliation, the controls that the reconciliations perform. And so that the team is taking that approach regards to reconciliation. And I think that would help resolve, I guess, some of the questions the auditors would raise. At the same time, we'll be proactive in telling the auditors as to, for the last financial years, all the reconciliations, which one we've fallen behind and why. So it won't be a surprise to the auditors when they walk in, but it will be an informed decision that we make regards to reconciliations.
Councillor Kerry, then Councillor Peter.
Thanks, Chair Philip. You did make quite a few comments that were about exactly the same as myself about asset valuations, revaluations, and that this isn't the first time it's cropped up. There's an enormous amount of work goes into this area. And just what I'm getting feeling from audit is that I appreciate where they're coming from, but their insistence to provide, and I agree with you, they're wanting the backdating contract rates, which have changed hugely in short periods of time, and that's not fair value. But in their report, they're insisting that we ensure we've got the right expertise. But small councils such as us, it's a significantly onerous and difficult job getting perfect revaluations of assets, and I wouldn't like to see us charging around hiring people that might have the right expertise. But there's a number of small councils that have got the same problem, you know, with roading and assets and building new stuff. That's not dissimilar problems, and there might be there could be a level of consistency. For example, you'll be seeing a lot of these and a lot of approaches that may be different or comparable, but I just don't feel that we need to, put our organisation to huge stress. The thing that only concerns me in a practical sense is where we're using big changes in revaluations for depreciation, which can have an effect on our rating, but on our rates and things. So that's the one that worries, if not worries me, but that's the one that we're concerned on a rating basis. That's the cash worries. Just more comments about the same issue.
Through your chair, if I can get this off my chest, I think. Two things. Really good point. When we engage in the revaluation process, we engage in external profession. And we go through a process ourselves and also through audit to actually, to want of a better word, test or assure ourselves of the competency and the professional qualifications of the valuer. Because that was very important, because we're taking the advice and we're relying on the expertise to perform a process for us, which is a revaluation. So both of us meaning council, management, and the auditors have gone through the process and acknowledged that the person that we're using is suitable through the valuation. So as part of the process, we rely on the expertise, rely on the process. And I think that's where we get to challenge the auditors. Auditors are just challenging the valuers' assumptions and process, which we feel like we've gone through a process and verified that this person or this organization is the expert in providing us that valuation. Then there must be a level of reliance on them and seeking the advice for doing. So this is where I think we get to this. So this is an issue that we have with the auditors, and I think we like to raise that with the audit director this time around. That's why Sarah mentioned that we got into a room with the audit director, with the valuer, so that we all can agree on a process, because we've got an expert in the room that we meaning we and the auditors agree is the subject matter experts in this space, and we have acquired the person's services to perform the audit. The second one is, and I think Philip talked about, is us agreeing and pushing back and drawing the line in the sand. This is what we'll do it. if I reflect on one of the issues that the auditors have raised years ago and we pushed back was the consolidation of Tara Aquatic. If you recall, they had a management item to say that council must consolidate Tara Aquatic into accounts because you are controlling entity. And we said, no, we're not. Until this today, we are in disagreement. That means we're saying no and they're saying yes, and we draw the line and says, this is our position because we got advice that we are not controlling and we are not going to do it. And I think the similar approach, I guess, Philip, we had a discussion that we have to do and take a stand in the evaluation process to say, we got advice from someone who is an expert in this space and engaging them, and this is our process, this is how we do it. I think that's the discussion, I guess, changing, I guess, the conversation we need to have with the auditors. And then, like, I take on your point that this is what we say that we will do, and this is the process, this is our management response to the auditors. And I think that's the starting point to have a discussion with the auditors.
Councillor Peter.
Raj, you mentioned cash was a high priority. I would have thought that there was very little cash in the system these days. Is there?
Through you, Chief Philip, it's less than $1,000. It's till floats and change that we hold for our dog registration time, and that's held within a safe. We complete regular audits within the customer service and library managers, and then within finance as well.
I guess I think it's important that it is audited and checked out and so on. There are a lot of light fingers around any organisation, but yeah, as a main focus, I wouldn't have thought it was high up there. Things to worry about.
No.
Councillor Johns, that we audit and reconcile to prevent any discrepancies, but I'm sure that both the Chief Executive and others would say there are not light fingers around this council. Just clarifying to be even.
I actually, when Sarah said cash, right, this is unfortunate. This was my bean counter hat automatically going on, right? I thought of cash and cash equivalents, right, which means our banking, reconciling our bank account, and that to me is actually, yeah, that to me, I'll talk to you about it later. That to me is actually what I was interpreting by cash, not the petty cash, right? But yes, I agree that you do those reconciliations from a process perspective, because you're saying is we are, right, this is our process, and it encourages good behaviour, good ethics, right? Anything further on the draft management reports? So yeah, I've got one final comment, and I've already warned the team that this is what my expectation is. What I want to see in our next committee meeting is a summary of all audits recommendations from the two reports, to saying is this is what they recommend, a summary, this is what what they recommended, this is what we're doing, this is when we anticipate to have that issue resolved, this is what we're not doing and the reasons for it. So if they're not doing something audit recommended, then we will actually endorse that, and we'll also our role is to one, get assurance that the work's being done, but also that the committee sets that the date that we anticipate it to be completed by. Now, this is a message for the Chief Executive, right? If the staff say is the committee wants it done by August next year, we don't have the resources to do it, then he's got to come back to council and say, the committee said this is a priority, right? What do we drop off? Or does he actually then come back to council and say, we need additional resources to complete it? And we actually have that risk discussion. But I think the message bugs me with other committees. We see dates that are being put in for next year, we get to next year and it's put out to the following year. I don't want to see that. So I'm just sending, put realistic dates of when you anticipate to have those completed by. Okay. Now your next memo letter.
Thank you, Philip. We have received a memo from our new audit director, Fiona, just stating, Raj is looking at me, I was like, stating what the audit plan is, what the purpose is, their key dates, and then their key activities. We've factored into our work plan for the annual report the items that they've identified within the audit plan. So the revaluation, we've touched on this a little bit already. Impairment of assets, we're already having conversations. I think Dan chatted to you briefly earlier around the Cyclone Gabrielle, and we know audit are going to ask us the question, what would happen do you need an impairment of your network given that your funding is over a 3-year program? So we're having these conversations with our roading team. We're also looking at the Dannevirke impounded supply and when the final reports come, what that looks like and completing an assessment around impairment for that as well. Just noting it is quite a significant asset and wanting to make sure that we've dotted our I's and crossed our T's for everything that's been identified. Everything else on there is sort of their BAU. The local water done well item, it's kind of a bit of a wait and see and we'll find out what we're going to do. And I think it'll be a tag team approach. Audit generally gives some guidance. Most common theme that happens from the local water well in the past 2-3 annual reports is just a note stating the status of local water done well is usually sufficient. I did want to just give you an update on the draft audit plan and debenture trust deed item where Fiona has said a number 3 it will be received by the end of August. We have received the debenture trust deed AEL letter on Friday. Otherwise, that's me. Any questions?
Any questions? I'm going to be honest with the committee here. I'm disappointed we only got a memo. I have actually seen other engagement letters or audit plans already signed off. So I think we just need to, I'm not sure why they are dragging the chain, but I'm disappointed, right? But it is what it is. It's no use making a big song and dance about it yet, but that to me is a message that needs to be communicated back to the audit director. I was actually in a meeting. I was almost going to do an extract and send it to Raj just when I saw the agenda come through and I say, I've already got it for one council, here it is, it's public. So to me, that's disappointing. But it doesn't, I mean, I think the part of it is we're not actually expecting to adopt our annual report. I got LTP on my brain at the moment for some unknown reason, annual report until November. So maybe it's not a priority for them. I think they're still dealing with a couple of LTPs. And I had a session with the Auditor General, John Ryan, and there's some bedtime reading on his website about the 23 annual reports. I've got some disagreements with that. And so if you want to read that, go to the OAG website if you haven't seen it. Talks about their observations about the 23 annual report process. But I think it is what it is, and we move on. Councillor Steve.
Yeah, just congratulate you on your truthfulness in the sense that you have got something to input to our committee here. So as the chair, you're sharing knowledge that we didn't know about or haven't thought of. So that's added value to our room. So good on you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? So we've got a recommendation way back in the agenda on page 17 that we receive the report. Can I suggest we also just add to that and we note the memo regarding the 2024 annual report. We're just noting that. Do I have a mover? Do I have a seconder? So it's Councillor Carey, seconded, Councillor Peter. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Now, next item is 7.3, Health and Safety Due Diligence Plan. How long are we going to take? Because I've been told there's going to be biscuits at 10:30, right? But yeah, absolutely. Yep. Okay. Yep.
Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. So I'll just accept the report as read and answer any questions or have any discussion on the due diligence plan.
I don't see any questions coming. I thought Councillor Scott Gilmore might have actually had a couple of comments here, since his name's mentioned in the document. Thanks, Scott, for your work on this one. Oh, here he is. He's here in person.
Yes, you say my name 3 times, I appear. Thanks, Chair Philip. No, I don't have any. I just do want to thank the team for the work that they've been putting on throughout this. We had a really productive meeting recently to talk through some of these items. So I don't have any questions. This fairly reflects comments that I made in that meeting. So thank you, team.
Mayor Tracy's happy to move. I was actually going to say, Scott, do you want to second that? Can you second?
Very happy to do so.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. The next item, 7.3, our unreasonable customer behaviour policy, our draft. How long are we going to take one on this one, Stephen? But more, so do we want to adjourn? So what we might do is adjourn for 15 minutes now. All right, and give you a bit of time to prepare, thanks. All right, thank you. We adjourn for 15. let's reconvene. And Stephen, if you want to come to the table and talk about your draft unreasonable customer behaviour policy, thank you. Take your report as read, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions. All right, thank you.
Chair Phillip, Morena all. Yes, take it as read. Any questions? Well, I just make a couple of comments before we start. So two of the key focuses for this policy are around the safety of our staff and our customers, and also the equitable use of council resources. I hope that as I've written this draft policy, I've left some room in there for how we work across all of the diverse communities that we engage with, and how sometimes behaviours are not what we expect. And I think a key part of that is the importance of de-escalation and personal safety training that our team participate in. And also another key aspect in here is that where persistent or unreasonable behaviour may be the result of us not dealing with the underlying issues. So that's included in here, that, you know, it's important that before we take action, we should be satisfied that we've dealt with that. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Oh, okay. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Scott. I don't know how you did that, but you're now top of the screen. Thank you for your question.
Thanks very much, Chair Phillip. I've got three quick questions on this policy, if you'll allow me. Just also noting the formatting just on page 96 of our papers. So obviously just getting that tidied up. My first question with this is on page 98, which I think is page 4 of the policy. And it is the line on inappropriate requests and some of the examples given. So, I'm sorry, unreasonable demands and inappropriate requests is down there. I just have a bit of a concern with that line in particular, because, you know, my belief, particularly from a customer service perspective, is people should have the right of escalation, and I just want to make sure that this doesn't close off the right of escalation. So if someone isn't happy with you know, an outcome of something, I don't think it would be an inappropriate request for them wanting to speak to someone higher in management to have that reviewed, or to an elected member, which actually I see as a key part of our job to raise things. So I just appreciate some comments on that, Stephen.
Thank you, Scott. That's a good point. And I just wanted to make clear that I've used as much as possible the Ombudsman guidance on this. And maybe this, and why it's a draft, is it may need rewording. But I think what we are looking at here is where the organisation has a way through our normal processes to particularly deal with routine matters that don't need to be escalated. So I'm hoping that the section on that, when we're talking about customers' underlying issues being dealt with before this policy comes into effect, I'm hoping that that is the trigger that we need to investigate whether things are dealt with. But I think where routine matters are taken, you know, several steps up the chain, rather than being dealt with by the subject matter experts and the people that normally would deal with it, is what I'm looking at here, and maybe could change the wording to reflect that.
Yeah, and thanks very much for that, Stephen. Through you, Chair Phillip. I completely understand the intent of that. However, I still do believe in the principle of escalation, and I also don't want to give the appearance that we're going to shut that off or label it as being inappropriate. And I think it is never inappropriate for a ratepayer to want to speak to the mayor or to one of their elected councillors. That would be for us to make a bit of a decision on, but I would hate that to be prohibited in policy or be labelled.
Yeah. Councillor, have you got any more quick?
I do if I can just get those out of the way quickly, if that's okay, Chair Philip. It's just one more because one's been covered off. On the next page, page 5, unreasonable arguments and unsupported claims. I just wonder, I note there that there's mention of conspiracy theories. I wonder if it would be helpful to have a direct mention of pseudo law within that line. So pseudo law is something that the courts are directly referencing using that terminology, and it might just be helpful for us to use that as an example instead of conspiracy theories that could be anything, be a little bit more direct.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. That's all I've got.
No, thank you, Scott, for those comments. Don't disagree with any of them. Councillor Peter.
Thanks, Chair Philip. Yeah, I agree with Scott's comments about escalation. A council like ours, a rural, smaller council, councillors are closer to their communities than council Wellington or any larger place, and we may know the background of a situation, or we know the people concerned, and it might be a good idea to escalate or get a councillor involved if you felt that might help the issue. So I wouldn't discount escalation as being a suitable way to resolve something. So I support Scott's comments in that regard.
Thank you. Councillor Sharon. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief Philip. Through you to Steve, thank you for including mention of elected members in here. I'm curious to understand, though, in the section under record keeping, under 9, you talk about how unreasonable customer behaviour needs to be documented in something called content manager. So in our discussion last time we had this, it was pointed out to me that if elected members had to report anything or document a record, that it would be achieved through the chief executive. Is that how we would follow this? Or it's just, I mean, it's further up you talk about elected members, which I'm grateful for, but when it comes to following through what you're requiring of staff around documentation, I'm just wondering where our ability to do so would be. And I'll turn my photo off, guys. I know you don't want to.
Didn't know you worked for Danny Big Jerry Supplies.
It's a very warm top that I'm wearing.
So in the report, I mentioned that the policy does not specifically cover unreasonable behaviour towards elected members. However, there's an opportunity to look at a framework for that. I think the relationship may be slightly different between staff and customers and elected members and the public. However, I think the discussion was around the practice should be, Councillor Sharon, you're right, that anything should go through to the Chief Executive, who will then use Council's normal record keeping processes. Yeah.
No, thanks for clarifying that, Steve.
Yeah.
Thank you through you, Chair Philip. Stephen, just in regards to scope, it talks about all interactions, but and I'm presuming that digital communications covers social media, but I just wonder if we actually need that as specific words around that to be very, very clear, because some of the some of the behaviour when someone doesn't say something in person can be quite often stronger in that social media sense. And we certainly have had staff reasonably disturbed and distraught from some of that. And then going into into social media management, it talks about hiding or deleting offensive comments and banning users from the page. But I guess just, who decides that and at what escalation? Because we do have some that are, in fact, I think there was one where, Facebook themselves remove it because of language and things like that. So just making sure that the team have got a really clear process to be able to do that if they're feeling that.
Yes, thank you. When we were doing our initiation and scoping for this policy, it was clear that social media was a really key area to make sure we cover. So hence including the social media management. And yes, I can see how we can clarify digital communications just to be clear that that's social media. Like in terms of how we respond to social media and use some of these restrictions, it would be the same way that we apply restrictions physically so that the same sign-off process that it requires escalation before people's ability to interact with us on social media is withdrawn. I think it fits into the whole rest of the policy. In terms of processes, I've indicated as well in the report that process development is the next step, and we're not there yet. And that's going to be a bigger chunk of work than actually getting the policy in place. But at least with the policy in place, that we have a platform to work from, which is.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just clarifying, Stephen, just the issue is, so we've had some feedback today. So what's the next step in terms of, look, I agree, we talked about that appeal process or that, I would also just want to sort of talk about the formal notice process as well, right? So someone they're actually given formal notice, right? That they are, and their behaviour is actually called out as being unacceptably in a formal statement to say, look, you have breached our standards because of X, Y, and Z. And I also would want to see that if you disagree with that, there is actually an appeal process, right? I note, because I fly too often, that people get banned from airlines, right? And there is no appeal process, which to me is actually fundamentally, again, goes against natural justice. So to me is, people, both sides make mistakes. So to me is, we need that ability of an appeal process. And I think that to me is really important, that appeal process is actually set out on the high level in the policy. So if you've you've been awarded this unreasonable behaviour, right? Award, right? That the appeal process is X, Y, and Z, right? But also just talk to me about the process for amending this document. Where does it go from here, particularly with the elected members?
Feedback, and I think I don't think I mentioned it, but the other part to this is our customer complaints policy, which is due for review as well. And I think that there's some work to do there. I think they could sit alongside each other. In terms of bringing this back, it's my intention to draft the changes that are required and bring that back to the next Audit and Risk Committee, which is October.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments? So what we've got is what we've got at the moment is we've got a recommendation that we basically receive the report, right? And I think recommendation 2 is, I think, is any feedback from the committee, I would actually say we actually move that we receive a revised policy at our next committee meeting as the recommendation. Do I have a mover? Councillor Steve. Seconded. No further discussion. All those in favour, please say aye. As against, carried. Okay, don't run away, Stephen. Probably the biggest item is 7.5. The risk appetite feedback report. And well, you can introduce this and point out the error of our ways.
Thank you. Philip, yeah, this has been a really valuable exercise, I believe, and will set us in good stead in 3.3 as we move towards being able to use this in all of our decision making future. This is feedback to the committee based on the 2 workshops that we held earlier this year. How I've set out the report is for each section, the table with all of the risk capacity, tolerance, attitude, appetite, and direction of travel. I'm feeding that back to the committee based on the results provided or the information provided at the workshops. For each area, the background is my attempt to articulate a summary of the council's objectives in the area, and then the comments and feedback provided by elected members at the workshops. And then I've begun work, and this has only been completed by for a few of the areas at this stage, in starting the conversation around the implications that the risk appetite that's come from the workshops, what the implications may be for council. So this is work that has not been widely socialised among the staff yet. So I think there's a lot more to do, and my intention today is to start a conversation and to provide the feedback to you. So I'm really looking to the committee to give me some feedback and guidance as I keep working through this.
Right, so how do you want to do this? Do we actually, just before, right? Do we want to do it section by section, or do we want to do it page by page rather than going backwards and forwards? Right? Because I can see that I've got some comments in various pages as well, and I'm sure other members of the committee have got some comments as well and questions. So my suggestion is we probably do it section by section, unless there's any generic questions at this stage. Councillor Peter?
Chair Philip. Yeah, just the second workshop, Aon Insurance presented, I can't recall what we learnt from that, but also earlier on we discussed having some advice from staff as to what other councils do with regard insurance and or opting to self-insure. And I'm not sure that we've been presented with a paper or a discussion on those options of self-insuring. And to my way of thinking, given the nature of our district and the 4 main towns, our risk is spread considerably. And there's a good argument to self-insure things like buildings, cars, whatever. And that's probably the biggest single issue that we need to discuss.
So no direct feedback, and I probably have 2 points to make there. One is that that's been so that is discussed in section around infrastructure assets and other assets, where the committee gave feedback about, say, for example, at 7.3, about that we have, because we have a distribution of assets across the community, a couple of pre-steps that I think that we need to take, or at least two. One is to be clear about what are critical assets or critical services, so that that can help us determine, where we might make some changes. We also need to look at, from a risk-based point of view, what level of risk we're prepared to accept in event of, let's say, a Hakarangi earthquake or some other thing that is going to affect the whole district. So there's a bit of conversation and a bit of research to be done, before we can get to making a decision about self-insurance. Yeah, and so I think that that's what I'm trying to open. I am wanting to open the conversation about.
Welcome, Mr. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair Philip, and good morning, everyone. Just in terms of self-insurance as well, and what other councils are doing. So as we MW LAS is where a lot of our insurance comes from. So that has been a question that's been raised through MW LAS. So Craig Grant, who's the executive officer for MW LAS, plus a senior manager for Horizons, has been tasked with that. So he is looking into that on behalf of all the MW LAS councils. And just further in terms of the Aon presentation, and one thing that I did take away from it was around the implications of underinvestment in your assets that relate to potentially insurance issues. So we connected that also to the land and building rationalisation work that council staff is also starting to identify what those buildings might, and those other buildings that we might take more of a risk-based approach in terms of maybe not doing any ongoing maintenance and other investment, and potentially falling into that self-insurance bucket. But that will come through that work that the team has started in identifying those properties.
Thanks, Brian. So it's a discussion yet to be had.
We're still doing the sort of the investigative type work to bring something back here and say, here's some of the buildings that are identified as those that we may no longer invest in, and therefore do we need to insure them?
Tracy.
Thanks, Chair Philip. Stephen, just under 6.7 and 6.8 implications, I just want to query, if I can, you've put the long-term plan prioritises spending on critical infrastructure projects that ensure community safety, connectivity, resilience and to climate impacts and support growth. When we use the word ensure, that changes the risk profile entirely. So before you go into anything else, if I put my commissioner hat on, the minute you use that word, there's no ifs, buts, that's what has to happen. So I'm just I just want to query that before you start the other conversation around risk, because insurers absolute must, and I'm just not sure that you can guarantee that, or you can hit that mark. Sorry to be pretender.
Fair point. I can see how that meaning can be taken.
Councillor Mike, thank you.
Through you, Chair. Just Brian, you were just talking about buildings just then. Will that entail also other infrastructure, bridges and the like as well in that assessment?
Chair, that roading isn't insured. Those.
Can I? in the early 90s, you could get insurance for bridges, but when you actually did the dollar value of what they were really covering, right, you're actually, the amount that you were paying in premium on an annual basis would actually equal what the maximum amount you could actually claim on, because it was actually done on indemnity value. So you, even if you could insure it now, right, highly likely you'd only get less than what you paid for it. So why insure? That was, right? And also, yeah, it's, the world has changed. Stephen?
And a point on that, and this is part of the Aon conversation, rather than saying we could insure our bridges, for example, there may be one or two critical bridges that carry critical infrastructure that supports the community. Then that's a different conversation to saying we're not at that asset maturity to say that yet. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Scott.
Thanks very much, Chair Philip. Yeah, it's a conversation I'm particularly interested in as well, and absolutely take the Chief Executive's point that we don't insure roading, but I suppose as a request for any of this work that we're doing, that we take depreciation into account, which is a key cost and I guess has similar implications. So Councillor Mike talked about bridges, depreciation on bridges. Definitely could be something we'd consider, whether we would replace a bridge in the same way if an event happened. So I just wanted to flag that because I think it meets the essence of what Councillor Mike was asking.
And I can give you personal experience in Wairara with their bridges, what's happened there, and the money that's required to replace those bridges. It ain't cheap, right? And there's probably not enough money in the country to replace all the bridges in New Zealand. Right? So, you know, bridges is a high risk, and how do you actually then manage that risk, which is what we're actually talking about here. So what, you know, it's about exactly what Councillor Scott's talked about, right? So what's our strategy, right? And Hamish is looking at me, I can see his eyes suddenly prick up, right? The issue is, you know, what's that overall strategy going to look like? It's not an easy question. And just for Councillor Peter, the only council that I'm aware that's looking at self-insurance on the short-term horizon, and it was in public yesterday, right? So I can talk about it, is South Taranaki. They're going to look at it in March of next year. And the only reason they're looking at it is they've got a long-term investment fund to the tune of $160 million, 140 million, depending on which month you look at, right? About $140 million at the moment. So they are the only council that I'm aware of that's seriously looking at any substantial self-insurance in the short term. I'm not saying it's not on the long-term horizon, but that's the only one that I'm aware of. So it's a long game. It's not a short game, because once you exit the insurance market, it's really, really difficult to re-enter the insurance market, particularly in the public liability, public indemnity space becomes very, very difficult. So it's a wide and long conversation that you need to have, right? And then you need to talk to your community, because they're the ones who potentially can pick up the tab. They expect council to have something, if something catastrophic ever happens and council is left wanting, then the community need to know what the rationale and the strategy behind it. It's a long game.
There's a discussion we need to have.
Oh, no, absolutely we need to have, but we need to start having the discussion rather than concluding the discussion in the short term. Okay, just going back to the agenda, are there any other, well, we talked about infrastructure, but are there any other concerns in terms of level of risk and appetite that people want to raise? Got it. Just to start off, right? I'll go through my one, and just it's a question for council, not necessarily for Stephen. Item 7, other assets and service delivery, on page 108, you said risk appetite high and you want to increase the appetite. Is that what you really said? Is that what you really meant? right? Sorry? When I say it like that, probably no, eh? Right? But when you read, Stephen's comments, that's what has been interpreted, right? So do we want to change that? Right? Question, right? And there's a couple of others. So if we want to, can we just address that one now? I put a starter for 10. Based on the discussion, I would say your risk appetite is high, but your appetite, I think, should, well, not reducing, right? Just remain at the stage at that level, right? Or review it, right? Rather than actually have an increasing appetite, because I don't know how you go. You'd have to go to very high, right? If that's where you wanted your direction of travel was. Because, I mean, if you remember, talked about that, we're not going to plan to replace every park because, if there was an event, but I wouldn't say that your appetite for that is actually probably increasing. It's probably more constant or constant review as the community change and affordability changes.
Why insure something that we're not going to replace?
Don't disagree with that, which is why that's why you've got your risk appetite is high, but the bit that I have a problem with is your direction still to increase that appetite. Okay, all right. Everyone agree? Councillor Scott?
Thanks, Chair Philip. I totally understand what you're saying. However, I suppose this is quite a lot of what we're looking at in our other items of our long-term plan, of some of our consolidation work that is yet to be done. But from where we are now to where we want to go, with some of our rationalisation of assets, potentially we do have a desire to increase the status quo of where we are at the moment. So perhaps that's already covered by us being in high, that might already be covered in there. But I suppose I wanted to make sure that the signal that we're sending is that we aren't accepting the status quo of where we're at the moment. We've requested staff to do some significant work on rationalisation. So I just wanted to mention that there, that doesn't get lost within the conversation.
Don't disagree with that. Maybe your current risk appetite is actually medium high, but you want to increase it. Maybe that might actually, therefore, because you're increasing the risk, that actually then generates that level of work. Because I couldn't see.
I'd support that.
Okay. All right. The other one that I have, if no one else got anything between then and page 113, is your risk appetite is low and you want to reduce that appetite. So I'm not quite sure how you would actually go even lower, right? But it's, right, to me, it's almost a constant monitoring again, right? That would be my only other comment on that one. Other than that, I actually don't have too many comments in terms of the actual wording. Any comments from members of the committee? Right, so to me it's probably, I wouldn't say you're reducing the appetite, right? It's just constant review, right? Right, because again, that's the way I perceive we should actually be looking at our financial, particularly our income. It's that constant review. Are there any other comments? So Stephen, can you just reinforce to the committee, you've got now sort of in this document, you've got implications and to be completed. Can you just sort of talk a bit more about what that means in the time frame? In your time frame, I should say, yeah, and your ability to do it.
Thank you. So the implications section is looking at what the committee is saying about where it wants risk appetite to be, and comparing that to how we do things in council right now, and are there any gaps or differences, and then what we would need to do as an organisation to get from where we are now to the appetite that the committee is comfortable with. So that will entail some engagement by me with the parts of council that the risk appetite covers, and with the ELT as well, to get that work done. So there's quite a bit of sort of cross department work to be done to get that current state of play clear, and then the gap between, if where there is a gap between what the appetite is and what. So for example, in section 1 around infrastructure, the implications you can see there, actually there's one. So for example, at 6.9, even in my initial look at this, it's clear that there needs to be some work done to better understand critical versus non-critical assets and critical versus non-critical services. Now, some of that work's been done, of course, especially during COVID-19, but I think that, and in development of our disaster recovery plan, but I think there's more needs to be clear, so that can be fed back to the committee so that you're clear on what we think are critical and non-critical, because that's going to help inform this, and then any gaps with the risks that any of our critical assets face. And we can see, like at 6.17, we've got the Danningford impounded supply, which sits outside of the risk appetite at the moment in terms of the risk that that asset poses. There is some work to get that all together, and I'm thinking that the process will be to feed this back to the committee. I'm not going to get them all done by October, but you know, in tranches over the next period. Yeah.
So what you just to paraphrase what you said is that the next committee meeting in October, you would be bringing portions of this back for us then to consider. And I'd hate to say it, that's probably a 12-month work plan just to review all these, and then you've probably got to start all over again. And hence, that's what my mantra is: risk is a journey, not a destination, right? Because it's forever changing. So this is just the changing nature. Thank you. So, all right, thank you for that. All right, any other comments, questions on this? So what we've got is sorry, Councillor Carey, I missed.
Thanks, Chair Philip. It was in the area of implications where I was going to ask a question. So just excuse me really for perhaps not seeing the whole picture here. So I can't quite see where we sit this. I'm a little bit confused with this. We've been through. I had a workshop, and there was some different opinions about the risk levels in this workshop, and what we've arrived at here is a version that sits with some. I mean, in the last workshop, you had a fair bit to say and changed some of your view was reflected this, Philip. But so I'm just trying to see. So what do we do with this? Really, if we go ahead and have to make some decisions, let's use the impounded supply, and we look at this, though it's excluded from this at the moment. So we sit as a committee and we start to make some judgments about things. So do we then pull this document out sit it beside and say, well, 12 months ago, we only wanted a low risk, but this is now high risk. What do we do? What we really do with this from a practical point of view? I can't quite feel in love with this document just yet, but I'll be. Anyway, that's me. I'm perhaps a little dazed and confused, but that's all right.
Oh dear. So totally hear your unlove of this document, right? Totally. And this is it's not a cast in stone policy. And I like your example of the impounded supply, right? So to me, this is the way I see it working, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, right? Or even the chief executive, right? Or Hamish, right? So the impounded supply you're saying is our general appetite is for infrastructure is low. Oh, we've now identified something that's of a high risk. So what that actually then entails is, no, it doesn't mean that we go and spend $50 million fixing the impounded supply because it's we've got a low risk appetite and we need to spend some more money. What happens is that we're saying is that's our overall appetite is low for this area, and we've now got something that it's outside of those that what we anticipated. So that's a red flag for, I was going to say, the chief executive and his team to bring it back and say, this is what you said, this is now an exception to that. What do you want to do? So it's, right? And you might see something that staff might identify something, right, in the finance area that we said is low risk, right, or very low. That's, again, bring it back. Or you might see something in another area that's moderate risk that we're actually got low risk and we're, right, and saying we've actually got some inconsistencies here, and it's actually bring it back. It's not saying there's not an automatic process that we're now going to move everything to these thresholds. To me, it's actually a guide for staff to say, this is what we said. Are we actually, is our appetite, is what we're doing consistent with our appetite? Is there a difference? And should we be changing our policy, or should we be doing a different intervention? That to me is it's a guide. It's not actually cast in stone. It's not a policy per se. It's a guide. Stephen and the chief executive, whether you want to make any comment?
Through you, Chair. I think you're right. It starts that discussion, but it means that it doesn't sit around for a year before we bring it back as well. May feel a bit like that with the impounded supply, but looking at managing the risk. But the way I see it, you can manage the risk in different ways as well. So it might be that yes, there is a risk with the impounded supply, but here's the options to mitigate it, and it might be end up being doing nothing with the impounded supply. So there's, it's hard to put a sort of a one rule that sits over all of this. There's sort of multiple elements to it, and I agree with how Chair Philip covered off the first part. It might be low risk here, but financially we're low risk, and they almost cancel each other out. So you end up having to have that discussion also. So yeah, there's no really hard and fast rule here, but it does give us a general direction, I think, how I'd put it.
Does that help lift the fog slightly? It's not 100% vision at the moment, but maybe the fog is that helpful? Councillor Carey?
Hold this part of the workshop, but to me, we're dealing with these things month by month. Let's use infrastructure for a minute. We've got to assess, they come forward, we've got to assess the risk, the cost. We're doing this assessment as we go. So what do we do with this thing here anyway? So that's, I sort of didn't quite get my head around what Stephen and yourself were saying. So we're going to do something October, and it's a lot of, I can see a heaps of work with all this, but I can't quite see it. Because I'm thinking, just looking at the long-term plan that we've been passed, we've been juggling this, assessing risk and costs, and we've got Waka Katahi saying you're not having any more money and cutting our fees. So these are things we're having to assess. Our risk levels, our tolerance for risk is probably being altered month by month with other people's decisions. So I'm just, it's okay. I don't want to delay this, but I'll say slightly foggy, half foggy really at the moment.
Yes, Philip, I'm a bit like Kerry in this regard, a bit foggy. I think we're getting confused with the risk of something happening and our appetite for it, the appetite for that risk. And the two are getting a bit confused. But it's, I mean, if we had this discussion in a month's time, our attitudes might be different. And then another month, again, different again. Who knows? And it's a question of to what extent do we give credence to it all? I know we have to have it, but to what extent do we sort of sit around the table and talk for hours about whether it's low, medium, high risk or what our appetite is, unless we're serious about saying, right, are we going to self-insure that and that and that? Unless we're going to go down that road, we're wasting a lot of time assessing the risk, in my view.
Just going to make a quick comment. So I think the helpfulness of this will be for us as officers when so if we think about when we're in the long-term plan or the annual plan process, this gives officers a framework to start with about where council's appetite is at, so that can be help part of the options and the discussion. I think without framework, what we're saying is we just eat individual on its merits, and not, maybe it's harder to see the wider picture. That if we're and as Councillor Scott was saying, that he wants to, in section 7 around other assets, that's exactly right. This is giving us, by using high, medium, high, and increase in appetite in here, that is setting the direction and drives officers' work in doing that. So I think that's the value in it, and it is another step forward as we move towards risk management maturity, is to get that framework there, so we've got something to work from. And it is an ongoing conversation, and it will change, and there will be exceptions, but it's a foundation, I think, as well.
Thank you.
I see the benefit of that.
Yeah.
I guess for me, my expectation or thought process around is when council decision-making papers come to council, that some of this is reflected in the officer's report around the risk, so that actually we consider that and understand it fully. Where perhaps there is, we've had two. You can get pressures around affordability, and you're always making those judgment calls, affordability versus risk. And I guess that's why I went back and clarified that word ensure, because that to me just raised the bar.
Yeah. Actually, same point that Tracy said, that Hamish and I just discussed, is that, it's got to be embedded into the decision-making framework, and it will be helpful having that risk setting and officers to cover that off and how it relates to the work that's been done here. So you get to see, when you're making a decision, what is the risk here, where did we sit, and we should cover that off as part of it. So that's what we'll look at implementing over the coming months.
There's someone going to make use of it, I'm happy.
Yeah, okay, excellent, great. Okay, excellent. So on that basis, basically, we're just going to receive and adopt the report. Right? Okay, do I have a mover? Councillor Mike, seconded Councillor Kerry. Well, that was very quick. No? All right, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye, those against. Now, Mayor Tracy's just pushed a piece of paper in front of me that was raised as part of the audit. Is actually, we do actually have the engagement letter for the limited assurance report in respect of the Tararua District Council's debenture trust deed. Now, if anyone's got any ideas what that really means, all right, I will attempt to explain, and Raj will correct me when I make the mistake. Basically, as part of your borrowing security with LGFA, you are required to have a debenture trust deed. There's an audit process. It needs to be signed by, it's actually addressed to councillors and trustees of the trust. So therefore, it's actually not addressed to Her Worship the Mayor. So as a late item, right, because we only received it Friday, right, can I have a mover that we receive it as a late item? Mayor Steve, so Councillor, yeah, out of order, yeah. Councillor Steve, right? Councillor Peter, right? All those in favour, please say aye. Right, now, Raj, do you want to, or just explain, basically, this is standard fare, right? If you would like, we can circulate it. I have skimmed it, right? But basically, all we probably need is that we want the mayor to sign it, and she wants to feel comfortable that she's got your endorsement to sign it. It's probably been signed before. Raj, it probably has changed before. Mayor Tracy, do you want to make any comments on this?
Thanks. I guess for me, it's just the first one that I've received that it says dear councillors, whereas normally I'd get that addressed to the mayor. So I didn't feel comfortable not having passed this through councillors when it wasn't addressed to me. So just seeking that clarification.
Through Chair, Philip, you're right. The letter, in terms of the context around the engagement letter, you're absolutely right. We have a debenture trust as part of the LGFA. We're required to have one. This was done many years ago. And this letter is pretty standard, hasn't changed from the first time we had the debenture trust risk audit. And you're right, Mayor Tracy, in a sense that in the past it's been addressed to yourself directly, and this time they've addressed it to the councillors as abroad, and that's why I think you rightfully has brought it up to have a discussion here with the councillors. We had a look at it. I had a look at it. Nothing has changed from previous years. The audit is usually done at the end of the normal annual report process. They'll complete the standard annual report, and then at the end they will then do the debenture trust risk audit. Main focus is basically looking at our term debt holdings. They will review the balances that we disclose in the annual report regards to our term debt and our borrow notes, and then they'll ensure that our disclosure. So what the staff do is that we prepare a disclosure that will go to the trustees, and they'll audit the disclosure. Disclosure is about a 2-page disclosure, basically reflecting what we have in the annual report, which is the debt, the term of the debt, and the debenture and the borrow notes holding. Yeah. So it's part, in a sense, of the annual report audit, but because they are required specifically to provide the trustees an audit report, that's why they have it a separate engagement letter.
Councillor Mike.
Just through you, Philip, who are the trustees?
Yes. Trustees Executors Limited. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Right. Trustees Executors Limited. Now they are a professional trustee company based in Wellington. Right? They basically, probably do about half. I can't remember how many they did. There's a whole lot of, there's two options, but I can't remember who they are. Raj probably knows. Well, it's been a while since people probably even looked. Is it, Raj?
True, Chair. But yes, it is, and I think it is. They are the trustees who are managing, I guess, on behalf of the LGFA. Yes, on behalf of the LGFA, the trustees to which the bench of trustees that the council signs we have.
Can I just add a little bit more as to their role? So in the debenture trust deed, and this is really important from a risk perspective, if a council was to default on paying LGFA, the debenture trustee, who is in this case trustees executive, have the power to appoint a commissioner. The commissioner has the ability to set a rate, okay, to recover the amount of debt outstanding. So each council has its, one or two of them, and they've got the power to appoint a commissioner. So it's actually well, you've got your own trustee, right? Knowing that other councils have actually the same requirement then gives you assurance that your guarantee is highly unlikely that it will actually be called up with LGFA. Councillor Peter, you had a question?
Oh, yeah, thanks. So all councils are joint and severally liable if one council faults?
No, not jointly and severally. So what happens is if a council defaults, LGFA rules require that you are liable to the proportion of your rates compared with everyone else. So Auckland would actually be picking up the lion's share. Okay, but before a council is actually in default, they would actually have no ability to pay back the debt. So basically, the commissioner who was appointed to recover the rates would actually be reporting back and saying, I've had no success in actually any of the rate payers paying the money. All right? And before that would actually occur, then the LGFA would have actually had to have actually exhausted its ability to fund that debt repayment, including additional funding from its shareholders and the New Zealand government. So it's actually a very, very remote chance. But basically what it would, for that to occur would be that a reasonably large council would have actually had to literally fallen off the face of the earth. i.e. Auckland has actually had a volcanic eruption and Auckland was no longer there. That's the sort of event, the scale of the event of the LGFA to actually call up for the council to be actually asked to pay its guarantee, right? And if that happens, I think we've got more pressing things to worry about as a country, right? Sorry? Yeah. But again, this is just the belts and braces that's in place that enables LGFA to have a AA rated, which actually then benefits all councils across the country who use LGFA. Welcome to bureaucracy, right? So the recommendation, right, needs to be that the mayor is given authority to sign the engagement letter for the debenture trust deed, right? Moved Councillor Peter, second Councillor Mike. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Carried, thank you. Now, just before we close the meeting, Roger's here at the close after the meeting. He wants to do an impounded supply. then I want to kick staff out and I want to have a quick discussion about an engagement that I'm undertaking with this council over the review of the LTP. And both Sharon and Scott are welcome to stay and participate in that. It's not all it's just doing in terms of it enables a free and frank without staff. I've already mentioned it to my learned friend on my left, Sandy. Thank you about what the process is, and also Raj as well. So, all right. So, closing karakia. We've got no other meetings. Don't need to. We're still here. All right. So we just close the meeting. All right. Thank you for your participation. Thank you, staff, and thank you for your participation. Meeting closed.